Why would someone facing the death penalty waive every appeal and walk willingly toward his execution? Why would a man on death row choose to die? This is the story of Norman Grimm, a convicted murderer whose case has shaken Florida's justice system to its core. A man found guilty of a brutal murder and sexual battery, who, after more than 2 decades behind bars, told a judge 2 chilling words: no appeals. In this true crime documentary, we will try to understand why he gave up the fight for his own life. Hit that like button and subscribe to be part of our growing community. Norman Merle Grimm Jr. was born in 1960. The Office of the Attorney characterized him as having enjoyed a largely normal childhood, albeit one that was marred by divorce, was able to work, and is of normal intelligence. However, the trial court's sentencing findings paint a more troubled picture. The trial court found that Grimm had a disruptive home life, which certainly had an impact upon him, and identified child abuse as a statutory mitigating circumstance, giving it significant weight. After high school, Grimm joined the Navy but was kicked out after getting into some undisclosed form of trouble, according to his family members' depositions. Trial court also noted Grimm had a history of alcohol usage, including being discharged from the military for substance-related charges. Court records established that Grimm suffered from an impulse control disorder known as intermittent explosive disorder, along with a depressive disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and a personality disorder with mixed features including avoidant, antisocial, and passive-aggressive traits. At the time of the murder, Grimm was taking 2 medications, Prozac and Depakote, which were targeted for the intermittent explosive disorder. The trial court found he suffered from significant long-term mental problems and gave this mitigation great weight. On September 9, 1982, a Pensacola police officer arrested Grimm after a woman reported that, as she was walking to work, a man got out of his car and grabbed her. She fought with him as he tried to choke her. She broke loose and ran, but he chased her down and began choking her again. The man pulled her into a car, telling her that if she did not stop screaming, he would kill her. However, when she told him that her purse was still lying on the ground, and that if he killed her it would be evidence, the man got out of the car to retrieve the purse. When he did, she drove off. The man was later identified as Grimm. In another incident occurring in the same area, a man standing in his own bathroom looked in his bathroom mirror and saw a man standing behind him. He chased the man out of the house and called the police. He then heard a scream from the house next door. When Grimm was arrested for these offenses, he was in possession of 2 firearms and 35 rounds of ammunition stolen in a residential burglary. In 1983, he was sentenced for a string of criminal offenses in Escambia County, including unarmed robbery, armed burglary, kidnapping, and aggravated battery. Florida Department of Corrections records indicate he was released from state prison in 1990, according to his family's depositions. After his release from state prison, Grimm moved to Texas to find work, but was incarcerated there after robbing a store. He spent more time in prison before being paroled, having his parole transferred to Florida and moving back home again. After returning to the area, Grimm reportedly worked in the fabrication department of a local manufacturing company for 4 years and was a good, productive worker. He married in 1997 and moved to a home in Milton, but divorced soon after. His employment history was considered a mitigating factor and described as shining, given significant weight by the trial court. Was he a broken man shaped by years of quiet failure, or was the monster always there, waiting? The summer morning of July 27, 1998, began like any other in the quiet neighborhood of East Milton, Florida. Cynthia Campbell, a 38-year-old attorney, lived in a modest home on Nimitz Road, pursuing her career and caring for her dog. Next door lived Norman Grimm, a man with a violent past, still on parole from a Texas conviction. What happened in the early hours of that Monday would become one of Santa Rosa County's most brutal murders. At approximately 5:08 in the morning, Deputy Sheriff Timothy Lynch responded to a call from Cynthia Campbell. She had reported a disturbance. Someone had broken a window at the back of her house. When Deputy Lynch arrived, he found Campbell standing on her front porch. She wasn't alone. Her neighbor, Norman Grimm, was with her, wearing nothing but a pair of cut-off jean shorts in the pre-dawn hours. The three of them walked around to the back of Campbell's house. There, Deputy Lynch discovered the broken window and a chrome lug nut lying in the bushes nearby. The investigation seemed routine, a simple property crime, perhaps vandalism or an attempted burglary. Lynch took Campbell's report. The time was now approaching 6 a.m., and then Grimm made an offer that would seal Campbell's fate. Before returning to his house, Grimm invited Campbell over for a cup of coffee after the deputy finished his investigation. She accepted. Deputy Lynch left the scene at approximately 5:51 a.m. Cynthia Campbell walked next door to Norman Grimm's house. She would never be seen alive again. An hour and a half later, Connie Kelly, Campbell's bookkeeper, arrived at her employer's house to drop off paperwork. She entered through the front door, calling Campbell's name. No answer. Campbell's car was in the driveway, the front door was unlocked, the lights were on, but Campbell was nowhere to be found. Kelly became concerned and called the police. By 9 o'clock that morning, when Campbell still hadn't shown up for work, her paralegal Cynthia McGee drove to the house. Again, the car was there, the keys were inside, Campbell's dog was home, but Campbell herself had vanished. Deputy Sheriffs Calvin Rutherford and Stephen McCauley arrived within minutes of McGee's call. They immediately turned their attention to the neighbor who had last seen Campbell alive, Norman Grimm. Rutherford obtained permission from Grimm to look inside his home. What he observed would later prove crucial to the investigation. Grimm was no longer wearing a shirt. On one of his shoulders, Rutherford noticed a light pink discoloration, what appeared to be a stain. Inside the house, there were no visible signs of a struggle. No bloodshed, nothing that would raise immediate alarm, but something was off. At 11 a.m., Corporal Blevin Davis arrived at the scene. He spoke briefly with Grimm, noting that he was wearing the same pair of cut-off blue jean shorts from earlier that morning. Davis observed several small reddish-brown stains on the shorts. Another reddish-brown stain marked Grimm's shoulder. Sometime after 11 a.m., with officers still investigating the property, Grimm made a request. His dogs had gotten loose, he said. Could he leave to retrieve them? Permission was granted. An officer followed him in a separate vehicle. Grimm got into his car and drove to a nearby park. He did collect his dogs, but instead of returning home as promised, he drove to a convenience store near the Pensacola Bay Bridge. Then he kept driving, making numerous turns through Pensacola, weaving through traffic. He had managed to lose the officer who was tailing him. Thomas Rogers managed a bait-and-tackle shop at the north end of the Pensacola Bay fishing bridge. That afternoon, sometime just after 2 p.m., a familiar face walked through his door. Norman Grimm. Surveillance cameras captured him entering the store. The footage would later become a crucial piece of the timeline. Around the same time, Cynthia Wells, a former co-worker of Grimm's, was driving across the Pensacola Bay Bridge when something caught her eye. A man was walking beside a parked car. Both doors were open. The trunk was open. The man was wearing a light-colored shirt and cut-off blue jean shorts. It was Norman Grimm. Wells kept driving. She had no way of knowing what was in that trunk or what Grimm had just done. James Andrews and his son were fishing from the Pensacola Bay Bridge that afternoon. It was a beautiful summer day, father and son enjoying the water, hoping for a good catch. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Andrews felt a strong pull on his line. The weight was unusual, heavy. He began to reel it in. What came to the surface wasn't a fish. It was a human body, wrapped in a sheet, a shower curtain, and masking tape. Law enforcement was called immediately. Detective Donnie Wigan drove to the convenience store and retrieved the surveillance tape showing Grimm's presence there earlier that afternoon. Officers secured Grimm's house. Detective Blevin Davis rushed to the Pensacola Bay Bridge and watched as the body was brought to shore. When Davis saw the body up close, something clicked. The victim was wrapped in striped sheets and black garbage bags, but there was something else. A piece of green carpet was wrapped up with everything else. Davis recalled having seen a similar piece of green carpet hanging over the rail of Norman Grimm's back porch just hours earlier. The body was formally identified through dental records and other means. It was Cynthia Campbell. Crime scene analyst Janice Johnson from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement attended Campbell's autopsy conducted by Dr. Michael Birkland, a forensic pathologist. What they found painted a picture of unimaginable violence. Under the black garbage bags, the body was wrapped in multiple layers of material: a floral sheet, a blue striped flat sheet, a fitted sheet, green carpet, masking tape and rope. They had to carefully remove each layer. Dr. Birkland documented the injuries. Campbell's face was covered with deep abrasions and contusions around both eyes, her forehead, both sides of her chin, and her lips, all consistent with blunt force trauma. There was additional blunt force trauma to both shoulders and to the head. Dr. Birkland determined these injuries were consistent with hammer blows. At least 18 separate impacts to her head and face. But the hammer wasn't the only weapon used. Campbell had suffered 11 stab wounds to the chest. 7 of those wounds had penetrated her heart. She had also sustained injuries consistent with sexual battery. The medical examiner's conclusion: Cynthia Campbell had been beaten, stabbed, and sexually assaulted. The brutality was, in the words of prosecutors, merciless. With Campbell's body recovered and the initial autopsy findings documented, investigators obtained search and arrest warrants for Norman Grimm's home. What they found would provide the physical evidence needed to seal his fate. Inside the house, investigators found 2 mops in the kitchen, both still damp with suspected blood on them. A clear attempt at cleanup. They found several articles of clothing with blood stains. They found a box of trash bags with bloody fingerprints on it, fingerprints that would later be matched to Norman Grimm. But the most damning evidence was found outside, on the back porch, a cooler partially hidden from view. Inside that cooler, investigators discovered a steak knife covered in blood, a hammer with suspected blood, a piece of terry cloth with reddish-brown stains, a pair of women's underwear, a tampon with blood stains, a pair of prescription eyeglasses, a wristwatch with a broken band, masking tape, a blue and white striped pillowcase, cloth tissue, an empty Bud Light beer carton, and on the back porch rail, draped as if drying, a piece of green carpet consistent with the carpet found wrapped around Campbell's body. The physical evidence against Norman Grimm was overwhelming. The prescription glasses found in the cooler matched Cynthia Campbell's prescription records exactly. The masking tape in the cooler was fracture-matched to the tape found wrapped around Campbell's body, meaning the 2 pieces had once been connected, torn from the same roll. Fingerprints on a coffee cup found on Grimm's kitchen counter were identified as Cynthia Campbell's, confirming she had, in fact, been inside his home that morning. DNA analysis of the bloodstains on the cut-off jean shorts Grimm was wearing when first questioned revealed 12 genetic markers consistent with Cynthia Campbell's DNA. The steak knife found in the cooler yielded 6 genetic markers consistent with the victim. The hammer found in the same cooler yielded genetic markers consistent with the victim. Swabbings from the box of trash bags tested positive for Campbell's DNA. A pair of blue jean shorts and shoes found in Grimm's living room both bore genetic markers consistent with the victim. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same horrifying conclusion: Norman Grimm had invited his neighbor into his home, brutally murdered her, attempted to clean up the scene, wrapped her body in multiple layers, and disposed of her in Pensacola Bay. But by the time investigators had secured the evidence, Norman Grimm was already gone. He had fled Florida, driving north and west, putting as much distance as possible between himself and the crime scene. For 4 days he was on the run. On July 31, 1998, 4 days after the murder, Norman Grimm was finally arrested in Garber, Oklahoma, over 1,200 miles from East Milton. Detective Davis flew to Oklahoma to pick him up, to retrieve the clothes he had been wearing and to arrange for the return of Grimm's car. The vehicle would be searched. More evidence would be collected. Norman Merle Grimm Jr. was brought back to Florida to face justice. He was charged with first-degree murder and sexual battery upon a person 12 years of age or older with the use of a deadly weapon. Cynthia Campbell was 38 years old when she died. She was an attorney, building her practice and her life. She had simply reported a broken window, accepted a neighbor's invitation for coffee, and trusted the wrong person. What happened to her in Norman Grimm's house that morning remains almost too terrible to comprehend. The brutality, the violence, the betrayal of basic human decency. In December 2000, after a trial that laid bare every horrific detail, Norman Grimm was convicted on all counts. The jury unanimously recommended death, 12 votes to 0. Cynthia's mother sobbed. One juror looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Grimm stood still, no visible reaction, no tears, no anger, just that same vacant stare. And then came the sentencing. For the brutal murder of Cynthia Campbell, the court sentences you to death. A single gavel strike ended the trial, but the story was far from over. For over 2 decades, Grimm sat on Florida's death row. Prison records show little activity, no public statements, no appeals that captured headlines. His name faded into the long list of the condemned. In October 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signed Grimm's death warrant, Florida's 15th execution of the year, breaking a modern record. But this time, something unprecedented happened. Grimm's attorney had retired and never formally withdrew. For 4 days, Grimm had no lawyer, a man condemned to die, legally unrepresented. A constitutional crisis began brewing. When the court finally appointed a replacement, Grimm refused to cooperate. In a short, chilling hearing, the judge asked him directly, "Mr. Grimm, do you wish to pursue any appeals?" "No appeals," he answered. Those 2 words sent ripples through the legal world. He was competent, the judge ruled. He understood the consequences. And with that, Norman Grimm effectively chose to die. Legal scholars called it state-assisted suicide. Religious leaders called it a moral tragedy. But Grimm never explained why. Was it guilt, resignation, or the calm acceptance of a man who knew there was no redemption left? For 25 years, the name Norman Grimm barely surfaced beyond prison walls. Inside the cold, fluorescent corridors of Florida State Prison, time didn't pass, it stalled. Death row is unlike anywhere else on Earth. Each cell is identical, concrete walls, a thin mattress, a small sink, a narrow slit of a window that barely remembers sunlight. Inmates live alone, 23 hours a day, the silence broken only by the echo of chains and the metallic hum of the fluorescent lights. For Grimm, this was life, or what was left of it. He spent more than 2 decades there, existing in a strange limbo between punishment and oblivion. Guards described him as calm, almost eerily so. He rarely spoke. He read the Bible, wrote occasionally, slept often, never caused trouble. Some said he had found peace. Others thought he was already gone, that the man who once walked into that courtroom had long since died inside these walls. He knew his time would come, but no one expected how ready he was. When the governor's warrant arrived in 2025, most inmates panic, calling lawyers, pleading, fighting for a stay. Norman Grimm did the opposite. He sat still. No emotion, no appeal. Just a nod, as if he'd been waiting for that knock all along. Most men break, he didn't. Inmates nearby later whispered he was too calm, too quiet, too ready. Some believed he'd made peace with God. Others believed he'd made peace with death itself. And maybe that's what unsettled the world most about Norman Grimm. He wasn't fighting to live. He was waiting to die. He waived all appeals, 4 days with no lawyer, no plan, no plea, just acceptance, cold, deliberate acceptance. As the date drew closer, reporters started calling it the execution of silence, a man who wouldn't beg, wouldn't explain, wouldn't resist. The state of Florida prepares to carry out its 15th execution of the year, a record-breaking number in modern history. But this one feels different. This one feels final. And the question that echoes through every hallway of that prison isn't when it will happen, it's why he wanted it to. And that leaves us with one final question: was Norman Grimm a monster accepting justice? Or a broken man the system finally gave permission to die? So, what do you think? Did the punishment fit the crime, or did the system fail again? Drop your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the haunting world of death row.